I decided to put it all on one bet, one horse, in one horse race, the Cheltenham Gold Cup in March 2018. And if that horse won, I would have won that money back. I had the intention to pay everybody back. If it didn't win, it had literally become a matter of life and death, and I was going to go and kill myself. I was one of those people that from a young age, I was obsessed with all sports. I didn't really care what I played as long as I was playing something. And it was all I was bothered about, really. It was all I wanted to do. And then it wasn't until I was 15 when kind of professional clubs started to take an interest in me, and I got put on the academy at Northamptonshire. That's when I thought, okay, this is really something that might happen.
You eventually ended up going to Durham University to play cricket there and study, of course.
Yeah, so I was playing full-time professionally after I left school. So I arrived at Durham in October 2006, year left on a contract at Northamptonshire, and life was pretty perfect. At that point in my life, I'd never placed a bet. I didn't know much about gambling at all. It wasn't something that anybody in my family did. None of my friends didn't have the same kind of access and exposure that you do now. And a few of the guys that I kind of got in with early on, they were into it. It was something that they did. And one Saturday morning, we walked into a betting shop in the middle of Durham. I sat down in the bucket chair in front of the machine. I had £2 in my pocket left over from the night before, and being an overconfident, arrogant, slightly naive 19-year-old boy that was at the time, I put my £2 in the machine. I put it on the only number that was different from all the others, green 0. It was the last number to come up, and I thought, what are the chances of it happening twice in a row? And 12 seconds later, £2 became £72, and my life changed forever. And that was my first bet. I always say to people, I can't explain the feeling it gave me because I'd never had it before, and weirdly I'd never have it again. Yeah, it gave me like a rush and buzz like nothing else, and people talk about drugs. That was definitely my drug.
And how did the habit kind of progress from this point onwards?
I guess I was different to most people at university because I had a lot more money than most people because I was being paid to play cricket. I had a student loan like everybody else, a generous mum and dad. So I did have more money, and I thought to myself, well, I can still afford to do what everybody else is doing, so who cares if I lose a bit gambling? The only thing about it from an early stage was it started to take up more and more of my time, and I wasn't always kind of totally honest about how much I was doing it. I'd go with my mates, there'd be a transparency around that, but then I'd also go 2 or 3 times at other points during the day on my own when they didn't realise. Whilst I was at uni in 2007, my cricket career ended, and I found that really difficult. That moment was tough. It hit me really hard, and I started to gamble more and more because I had the money, the time. It would actually replace sport in many ways. And then when I moved to London, it was a huge turning point because I'd moved to London, I think, for the wrong reasons in many ways, because I'd kind of followed the crowd because I didn't know what I wanted to do with my life if I wasn't playing sport, and it was what all my mates were doing. I thought it's the done thing to move to London, to work in finance, to try and earn as much cash as you possibly can. And a big change in my kind of mindset was I was previously motivated very much by sort of success and achievement. And now I was only bothered about money. And I think that was partly because I was gambling, but also because that was the culture and environment that surrounded me. It was what kind of made people tick in that world. And so actually all I wanted was as much money as I possibly could.
What was the biggest amount you won during this time period?
Having kind of received some good news at work, being told that I was getting a promotion, a bit of a pay rise, a Christmas bonus, all those things you kind of crave as somebody in that world. I went out with my mates to celebrate that night. Before I met up with my mates, I walked into the shop and I put the biggest bet I'd put on to that point. It was a football accumulator. There were 6 matches, and 2 of the matches there had to be a draw. 3 of the matches both teams had to score, and one of the favourites had to lose. I put £500 on this bet. I walked upstairs, I started getting drunk, my mates, and that night £500 became £34,968. And that was the biggest single win that I'd had and ever would have. From that moment onwards, not only did I kind of feel like I was totally invincible, I thought it would happen every time I did it. When it doesn't, well, it doesn't matter, it's bound to happen again at some point. But actually the worst thing about it was that was when it became like a drug, because now if I didn't win that amount of money, it didn't give me the same rush buzz hit, just like a drug, and I wanted that every time I did it. So I started to put more and more every time I bet, bigger stakes. So I'd keep doing it, but also I started to feel guilty, embarrassed, ashamed, stupid, emotions that I wasn't used to dealing with. And I started to combat those by drinking even more alcohol, taking drugs, and life just started to spiral in a very, very different direction. I never told a single person in the world that I won that money that night. That was pretty hard. But I also lost it in a few weeks, and when it was gone, I wanted it back. Started trying to win it back. And then once I'd lost that money, I started to get into debt. And I guess over a short period of time, that changed completely. Nature of my job was kind of walking from the office to the Lloyd's building. Historically, I would, on the way there, I'd stop, go into the shop for 15 minutes and have a bet. That now became times where I'd be in there for maybe 3-4 hours. I wouldn't do what I was supposed to do. I'd then make up a lie about what had happened, and rather than that happening kind of once a week, it started to happen 3-4 times a week to every day. By that point, I had 4 bank loans, I had 5 credit cards, I'd missed a couple of months rent payments, and financial situation was starting to become pretty dire, to tell the truth. I was starting to really struggle with my mental health, although I didn't want to tell anybody about that, of course. But yeah, financially, it wasn't great. But if at that point I'd stopped, it wouldn't have been as bad as it ended up being, that's for sure. I'd put on about 3.5 stone, I had all this debt, and I thought, what on earth are you doing? I decided to try and do something about it and leave London. At first, when I first became a teacher, I felt that that was the moment that gave me the opportunity to stop, and I tried. And whilst I still did it, I wasn't doing it all day, every day, and I thought I'd crack this problem. But then when the first set of holidays came along, things started to go wrong in my life. I just started to do it more and more, and eventually I would probably spend 75% of my day gambling, because I could do it on my phone. There's always a reason to be on your phone. People thought I was on WhatsApp, social media, emails, all those things that people are, but I was just gambling. And so it meant I could do it whilst I was teaching. It meant I could do it whilst I was doing whatever else. And I just did it all day, every day. That's not an exaggeration. It just completely consumed everything. The salary I got paid would usually last the first or second day of each month. And then I'd think, well, how on earth am I going to pay off my debts, my bills, carry on gambling, live, afford anything? I turned to payday loans. I had 23 different bank and payday loans. And then I guess all those kind of avenues had been exhausted, and it was at that point that I started turning to individuals. And eventually, out of desperation, I'd make decisions at work that I'd regret forever, because I would start to abuse my position as a teacher. I worked in a private school. I wasn't stupid. I knew how wealthy some of these people were, had access to that information, and I started to take advantage of it and lie to them. So I'd borrow money off parents of pupils that I taught. I lied to them why I needed the money. They liked, respected me, were worried about me. They had the money to lend me. I promised to pay them back. I didn't pay a penny back. I'd gamble it all away. And when it all came to a head, it transpired that there were 113 different individual people that I'd borrowed money off. ranging from about 75 quid, which doesn't sound too bad, up to the best part of £30,000. And I had £500,000 worth of pure gambling debt that obviously now I'm spending the rest of my life paying back. And it started to take its toll. Living this double life was exhausting. And I actually knew in my heart of hearts it wasn't sustainable. There was no way I could kind of keep up this pretense. Essentially, the school that I was working at became aware of the scale and the extent of the problem because they'd received complaints from all sorts of different people, and they'd kind of opened up an investigation. And at that point, I knew the consequences were going to be as bad as they could be. I knew that I was going to lose my house. I knew I was probably going to lose my job. There was no way I could carry on being a teacher there or anywhere else. And I knew I was potentially facing kind of criminal conviction. I might go to prison because I knew that I'd been kind of forging signatures on contracts, all sorts of different things. And after kind of receiving that news, I borrowed a sum of money off somebody I'd already borrowed money from, told them a lie I'm not very proud of. I said, look, I desperately need £10,000, but I promise I'll pay you back at the end of the week. And that's because completely coincidentally, it was the start of the Cheltenham Horse Racing Festival, the biggest festival of the year, my biggest week of the year. And I honestly believed I could turn £10,000 into £500,000. So I put on a series of kind of speculative bets that not even I thought had a chance. And I had one bit of luck on the Thursday that will never ever happen again, when one jockey and trainer won pretty much every race. And the £10,000 that I had started with was suddenly £58,000. I decided to put it all on one bet, one horse in one horse race, the Cheltenham Gold Cup in March 2018. And if that horse won, I would have won that money back. I had the intention to pay everybody back. Yes, I probably still would have lost my house and my job, but at least I could have paid everyone back and my life could continue. But if it didn't win, it had literally become a matter of life and death, and I was going to go and kill myself. And I watched that horse race in a lesson. I had kids sat in front of me doing work. I watched a horse lose by a few lengths and my whole world came crashing down.
Did you reach out to anyone for help at this point?
I'd always seen a way out, and at that point there was no way out as far as I was concerned. I tried to essentially drink myself into submission, take an overdose of antidepressants, sleeping pills. I even tried to drive my car off the road in a kind of 48-hour period before eventually arriving at a train station, and was on the verge of doing the unthinkable. I was in floods of tears. I had commuters all around me, a lot of them kind of looking at me, some of them laughing at me, thinking, what's wrong with that bloke, as I was stood there in a complete mess in floods of tears. But actually I didn't care, because I felt real. The only person I could bring myself to tell in a way that I felt was right was my best mate in the world, and that's my little brother. I didn't want to call him. I didn't want him to hear me in the state that I was in, because I think he might have reacted differently if he'd heard that. So instead of calling him, I sent him a message. I told him what I was about to do. And fortunately for me, having tried to call me, he then sent me a message, and that message saved my life. He said, look, tell me what the problem is, talk to me about it, and I promise I'll try and help. And as simple as it sounds, that's what I needed to hear, and it's what stopped me doing it. I took myself home. I came clean to my girlfriend initially, and then my parents, and that was so tough. But I think one of the things that I reflect on more than anything else is that their reaction was so different to how I thought it was going to be, how I'd played it in my head for the last however many years. They didn't disown me, they didn't go mad. They recognised I had a problem. They were glad I was still here and that I needed help. I was admitted to rehab, for want of a better term. I went to treatment on Harley Street in London. And those few weeks, months were really, really tough. I, like a lot of people, wanted a quick fix. I thought, oh, I'll go in there, I'll get treated, I'll walk out and I'll be cured. But But actually I had to learn pretty quickly that this was something that doesn't just go away. It's something that I manage essentially for the rest of my life. The process was tough. I had to sort of come clean to people, and having some of those conversations, particularly with people that I owed ludicrous amounts of money to, and had to admit that everything I'd told them was complete rubbish, and that actually it was gambling, was so hard. But people have been a lot quicker to forgive me than I think I'll ever forgive myself.
Did you kind of figure out how much money you did spend on gambling over how many years?
Yeah, I had to go back through messages, emails, bank statements, gambling accounts. I think it transpires that over the course of those 12 and a half years, I'd transacted about £2 million worth of bets online, which was frightening in itself. The volume of bets, the amount of bets I was placing every day was mad. I had 76 different online accounts opened up in 65 different people's names. So just the sheer scale of everything was just way beyond what even I thought it was. And in my head, it was pretty big. Ultimately, nobody should go through what I did. And I often say to people, I'm one of the lucky ones because I'm still here. Too many lives are lost to gambling every year, and that just can't happen.
And you now do a lot of campaign work to help people struggling with addiction. What does it entail?
So I now work full-time for a kind of organisation that specialise in education and prevention. We use our lived experience to try and raise awareness of the problem, educate people about the dangers and pitfalls, reduce the stigma, help people kind of spot signs in themselves and other people.
Do you have any advice you'd like to give to someone who thinks they might be addicted to gambling?
Understand that it's very easy to lose control very quickly, and the sooner you can recognise that you've lost control and do something about it, the better. I have an issue with the fact that gambling is so ingrained in culture and society, and yet still a bit of a dirty word. It's still something that people don't talk openly about. People only ever talk about when they win, never when they lose. It's often something that people almost feel ashamed to admit that they do. I think I would have found it much easier to talk about a problem with drugs and alcohol and gambling. That in itself is not right. So reaching out for help is tough, but tell someone. It'll be the best thing you ever do. One of the things I had to learn over and above everything else was that it was about managing this for the rest of my life. And I now am able to do that. Every day that goes past, I feel like I'm further away from a bet, which can only be a good thing.
Yeah, I met up with someone I knew, I'm not going to say friend, like an associate. A substance that I guess straight away was heroin was put on the foil, and I was showing how to smoke that.